Okay, kia ora koutou. Welcome to the Regional Pest Management Joint Committee meeting for, the date's not right. That's okay. First of all, just a reminder that we do have some people on Zoom. So if you're on Zoom, we'll be keeping an eye on you. Just use your hand to signal that you'd like to speak. And for those in the room, if you can make sure that you use your microphones and just signal if you've got questions with a hand, and I'll make a note of it. I'm going to start with opening karakia. Kia tau mai te maramatanga, kia tau mai te rangimarie, kia tau mai te kaha me te aroha mō tēnei kaupapa, hui e, taiki e. And the translation is, let's be grounded in clarity, let's be peaceful, let's be strong and loving at this issue, bind together, and so it is. I'm moving on to apologies. We have an apology from Stuart Bryant. Is there any other apologies? Okay, we don't have Councillor Benge on Zoom. Okay, and we don't have an apology. Would somebody, or I'm happy to move the apology from Stuart Bryant. Is it? Thanks. Mike's going to second that. Thank you, Mike. Public forum. I don't think we have a public forum today, do we? Declarations of interest. Are there any interests that anybody would like to declare today? No declarations of interest. Moving on, minutes to be confirmed. So we need to confirm the minutes for the 24th of March 2023 meeting. Would anybody like to move those? Thanks, Aaron. Councillor Stallard. And seconder? Anybody? Thanks. Councillor Kinnermouth. Mike. And moving on to reports, I think we've got Gwynnie is going to present the report.
Yes, and it's, I think, going to be a brief, what we thought would be best to work through sort of step by step through each species is probably the best way. So I'm take the report as read, and that you'll see that there's a summary within the report of the general recommendations, and then the attachment has a lot of detail depending on how much you've read before the meeting, and it includes both the cost benefit analysis, which has been completed by Jim. So Jim's in the room, so we can question him all you like. And also Peter Russell, who's online, he has written the rules recommendations, which are in, I'm trying to remember which one that is, attachment 1. And then, yeah, the cost benefit analysis is in attachment 2.
So you wanting just to talk through it now, or would you like to take general questions to start with?
Thanks, Robin. If I can just make a general statement, those two attachments probably want reading together. Peter's put together a good summary in terms of the Biosecurity Act drafting and the options. But if you want the detail in terms of the current distributional data of the individual pest species and their potential range, etc., you'll find that in the cost benefit analysis in attachment 2. So I found it quite useful to have the two open in front of me, because I could then jump between the two to actually get the full picture.
Yeah, I found the reports to be very thorough and, you know, a detailed analysis. So I thought it was really valuable. Thanks for that. I've got a question from Mike.
Thank you. I thought we as a group decided that we were just going to call it feral cats, not feral/stray cats. Sorry to be like this at a late hour, but did we not, has it gone back to the way it was before?
You're going to correct me if I'm wrong. This came out of the full council meeting at Tasman. district council. That's right, isn't it? We changed the wording in response to that meeting to be, because I think there was a mix of pest, feral, stray cats as language in that discussion, and we came to the conclusion that we were only talking about feral and stray cats as a definition that people understood as a general rule across.
So in short, yes.
Yeah.
The decision was made in this joint committee, and it has gone around in a circle on us at the full council meeting.
Thanks for that. I'm comfortable with that. Are you comfortable with it, Mike?
Yep,
Yeah,
sure.
great. And Aaron, are you comfortable with the wording used in the report?
Possibly. I do recall we had a good discussion at this previous meeting around feral, stray and pest. And my recollection might be wrong, but I thought we sort of went to a high level pest because any cat could be a pest. And that leaves us open to control the cats that are causing a problem. And I do see that there are definitions in this document, and especially the one about feral and stray. I think it's not registered and unhomed and so on. But I guess that leads to a question, but I'll come to perhaps later about what we do in one of these controlled areas where there is a cat that is registered or tagged and has a home, what we do with it then. But I do think it is important with our comms, because this will be an item of high interest, and people want to know if their cat is going to be considered stray or feral or a pest. So I think it's important we define the terms clearly and use them consistently. And that might, perhaps at this meeting, if we just have that information from officers, so there is a shared understanding of what terms we're using and what they mean.
Somebody want to respond to that?
Yeah. So the most, I guess, universal understood definitions when you talk to a vet, a SPCA, general public, is that you have a feral cat that's out in the back country, never met a person, straight feral, a stray cat which is closer to town, maybe getting fed by someone but doesn't have a home. Nobody's giving it vet treatment, no one's giving it regular care. And then a homed companion cat, which is a pet. Someone is responsible and is giving that animal care. So those are the three definitions that we think are well understood in the general public. Using the term pest cat would encompass both feral and stray cats, but it can cause confusion for people when they think that we might be referring to their pet cat as a pest cat based on our feeling towards that cat rather than its status, I guess. Does that make sense? Is that yeah. So our general recommendation as staff would be to avoid pest cats, just to avoid that confusion and getting people upset about their pet cat being targeted when we are not targeting their pet cat.
You comfortable with that, Aaron?
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's a subjective term, and you're right, people want certainty. So I agree with that. Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome to Stuart. And I've got a question from Celia, Councillor Butler, if you'd like to ask that.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, I'm just thinking that I've got a question about the consultation document, because this is fairly crucial to what we're going to have in the consultation document about cats. And so my question is, what's the process for actually writing the consultation document, and does this committee actually see that document before it goes out for consultation, just given that this is a very sensitive topic?
The staff person want to answer that?
In terms of preparation of the consultation document, as you observed, Councillor Butler, the information that's in front of you is the basis of the information that would go out on a limited review proposal. However, obviously, in the case of cats, there would need to be some additional information compiled. Now, there are a number of documents that have been compiled over the last couple of years, pulling together information that can be drawn on for that purpose. So we're hoping it would be a relatively quick process to compile that document. And in Tasman's case, as you will have seen in the meeting agenda material, the recommendation is really only to add feral cats into a couple of the existing site-led programs. So in the Tasman case, it's not much of a change from the status quo in terms of the actual approach. So we weren't anticipating a huge amount of documentation, but getting back more directly to your question, we'll start putting together that consultation document as soon as this meeting is complete and we have clear drafting instructions.
If I've got a follow-up question, if that's okay. For Nelson, there's 31 sites of interest or areas where it's warranted that pest, feral and stray cat control may be necessary. Is Nelson City Council going to do its own consultation document, or is it just the one document that goes out from both councils jointly?
In terms of the actual limited review proposal, it would be one document, but that doesn't preclude the two councils from engaging with their community independently around that document and what it means.
And so is it an option or is it a possibility for that consultation document just to come past the committee or the chair?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. The actual limited review document would need to come past the committee because at the end of the day, it's your role to then consider it and to recommend it or otherwise to council. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. I see we've got a hand up on the screen from Nick. Is it Mr. Russell?
Yeah, Peter. Yeah, Madam Chair, just on the definition of feral and stray cats, if you dive into the appendix around feral cats, there is a definition we have there written about what it is and also what a pest agent cat is. So that's something that you may want to come to later in the meeting, but there is a definition there just for information at this stage.
Thank you. So while we're on kind of more general questions, I just noticed there's just one. I'm just pulling it up on page 6 of the report. For the species, it says water. I'm assuming that means water. That's water salary. Yeah.
Correct.
Thanks. Have we got any other general questions from committee members? Or shall I hand it back to Jenny to talk us through? Gwynny? Gwynny, sorry, Gwynny. You can. Anything from you, Stuart? No.
I think we're going to go through each of the suggested species one by one.
That's what Gwynny's suggesting. So
Thank you.
maybe hand it over.
My apologies for lateness.
No problem. Sorry, have you got a question, Mike?
Yep, another question. That's all right. AJ, item 4. We talk about financial impact within existing budgets. Yeah, it can be managed within the existing budget allocations for this program. I would have thought we would have needed a hell of a lot of money through the LTP to do a lot of this work. Can someone explain to me how we can use the existing budgets to do like this tracking that Paul was talking about over in Golden Bay? And am I missing something here?
That's right. But I'll let Paul answer.
If we can look at the Waimea Inlet site-led program, that's largely being delivered by community groups through Tasman Environmental Trust. So that's really at little or no cost to the council. And we'd be anticipating that within the recommended Sindana program, or within the recommended Able Tasman programs, that the existing groups and organisations would largely be undertaking the delivery. In terms of the wild and conifer stuff, I suspect there's going to be more staff time, and probably in the longer term, when we've got a better feel for where we're going on this, we will need to review what is put forward in terms of operational budgets. But every year, the council gets to review the operational plan for the upcoming year and to make what changes it chooses to do so and approve budgets. So with those operation plans, what tends to happen is you try and make the money you've got available fit the work you've got on the table to do. So it may be that you make more progress in some areas and less in others in a year for whatever reason. So there's some ability to do a little bit of adjustment in terms of the rate in which you're advancing the various programs.
Just a quick follow-up question. Is it correct that for the wild and conifer work to date, there's been quite a lot of central government or MPI funding for that?
Within the Tasman area, we've been the fund holder for around about $5 million worth of work. That work has also occurred within the Marlborough area and within the Nelson City area. So mainly through Mount Richmond Forest Park. So yes, there's been substantial central government funding, which is a drop in the bucket in terms of what it's actually would take to completely eradicate wild and conifers out of that area. So we're in an unfortunate situation in many ways, in that the priority areas have received the first knockdown, but the lower priority areas haven't been managed yet. And unless the follow-up work is done, it's likely that wild and conifers will re-establish in those areas. So it's something that as a country we're having to work through. The regional councils of the country are talking with central government, seeking further funding for at least those areas where work has started, but it's not looking that promising at the moment.
Thanks, Paul. Do you want to continue, Winnie, talking through the different sections of the report?
Do you want to just go straight to the individual species? Is that
Mike, question?
Sorry, everybody, one last question. I'm getting a hairy eyeball over here. Given the likely impact on our ratepayers, both Nelson and Tasman, and the nature of what we're proposing, have we discussed or worked through any ideas of publicising it, keeping our ratepayers on board, a media campaign? I noticed here that Paul, we all seem to finish at July, August. We're going to notify a decision, but there's nothing in there about a media rollout or something to, because as soon as we start doing notifications and wanting submitters, we're going to be, I'm sure, inundated with all sorts of people's problems. And I would like to be able to front foot it and do consider some sort of media program. What's your thoughts?
In terms of our pest management activity, we do obviously have a place within the council website, as does Nelson City, and we also run regular sections in council magazines in terms of various pest species to try and keep the programs before the ratepayers. But you're quite right, councillor, that in terms of upcoming consultation, Mr. Smith reminded us today that we need to make sure that this gets on to the upcoming consultation program and that we engage with our comm staff to make sure that things are aligned.
Okay, so my suggestion would be to step, so the report is quite long. And as Paul said, it's best to step through looking at both the two appendices together. So looking at the recommended rule changes, and then we can look at the cost benefit analysis alongside that if we need to. So I would suggest, if you guys are happy, to just step through each species as they come up on the list, starting with blue passion flower.
Sure, and I'm not sure how TDC councillors feel about it, but I know that the Nelson City councillors have read through it and feel pretty comfortable with where it's landed. So Aaron, you'll let us know if you've got questions, but I think you probably don't need to go too slowly in case, unless questions come up. Would you agree with that? Yeah, thanks.
So I'll encourage staff to jump in if I get something wrong. It's, Peter Russell and James Lambie are the two writers of these two, so they're the ones who know this intimately. So yep, they'll correct me if I say something. So first was blue passion flower, and preferred option for this was eradication. How much detail you'd like me to go into?
I don't have any questions, but if you do, Stuart.
Just weary that this isn't going to be another Taiwan cherry episode, for the want of a better word. Like I think that was the issue with that. It was on Port Hills, and then region wide we found there was a lot more than we thought, and I'm just nervous that this could be the same. Is there any study or looking being done more region wide than just the Port Hills to give us a bit of an indication?
So we have got blue passion flower sites in Tasman as well. So the biggest site is around Hope, sort of that section. And we have started doing a bit of control in there, just as an anecdote. I guess that the team have gone in without any rules behind them for that site and had really good support from the landowners, because it's a it's not particular. I mean, it's a pretty flower, I guess, but other than that, it's not a particularly loved species the way we've seen with Taiwan cherry. It doesn't produce an edible fruit or anything that someone's particularly attached to. So our anecdotal, evidence behind that would be that we have had it's an easy conversation to have with someone to say, hey, can we get rid of this?
And perhaps, excuse me, and perhaps not so widely spread.
Correct.
Oh, that's helpful, as long as that keeps down. Paul's indicating.
Yeah, if I could please, as part of the research underpinning the information you have in front of you, we had a couple of our biosecurity staff, Briar Cook and Mitch Seek, look at the existing distributional information for each of these species and to go out and do some field validation as well. So we have had a bit of a look. So have a, what we don't know, obviously, but we've had a reasonably good look.
Thanks. You can continue, I think, Winnie, unless there's any other staff who want to say anything about blue passion flower, we can move on to, I think that's bone seed.
So the next is bone seed, and this is probably a Nelson specific rule change. So Nelson team might want to speak to it. Or if you have specific questions.
Perhaps I could do a little bit of an outline to this. When the current pest management plan was prepared, the bone seed area of the Port Hills was excluded. For the rest of Tasman and Nelson, boneseed as a targeted pest. But in the Port Hills, where it was in reasonably high density, it was decided it wasn't really practical. However, as time's passed, it's become obvious that that's a source of seed for outside the Port Hills area. So even if you can't really realistically say eradication is an option, certainly suppressing the seed source in the Port Hills is of value for the wider double region.
Thanks, Paul. No, I don't have any questions. Does anybody else have questions? No. Okay. Can move on to feral stray cats. Or you go in whatever order you want. I'm just going through the agenda.
I might just skip through the plant ones first, if that makes sense. get through those, the easy ones. So the next on, I know that the order is out depending on which list you're looking at. Moth plant, which we have asked for eradication as well. This is similar to the passion flower, probably less instances of moth plant, and it is a poisonous plant, so people are quite happy to get rid of it. That's there's any specific questions around moth plant?
Yeah, Aaron.
I just wonder, that seems to be an emerging problem. How does this kind of plant get into the region?
Yeah, Jim.
Peter and I could guess. It was popular as a garden plant at one stage of its life, and it has a very, very mobile seed. So it's the kind of thing that someone could slip into their pocket from another region and just bring in by accident, or bring in on purpose, thinking it was something nice. And then it's got away on them. It's a seed pod that splits itself open and produces fluffy seeds that fly around everywhere. So if you've got one, then you've got many. Fortunately, in Tasman's case, it does seem that the populations are quite dense, but quite limited in where they are. They're almost like they're still within their core populations, which is what makes them reasonably eradicable.
Any more questions? No.
Thanks. Just a wee follow-up. So it's an established pest that's not being tackled in other regions, and are there certain pests that do demand a nationwide response, or else one region acting in isolation is not going to be a very efficient approach?
I can't say across all regions because I don't know what all 16 are up to, but moth plant appears in Auckland, Horizons, Wellington's plans. I don't know if it's in Marlborough's plan, which would be quite a pertinent response there to your question. If there's plenty of it over there and they're walking away from it, then it's a risk to this region. West Coast would be the other one that we would look at. So that's something Peter and I could actually look into to see whether or not their plans have moth plant managed as well. And if they don't, we'll highlight that as a potential risk to the eradication strategy.
Thanks. And I think we've got I saw that Mr. Russell had his hand up. Have you got a comment or something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to support what Jim has said. It's pretty much in every regional council's pest management plan in the North Island, from memory. Possibly not Napier or Hawke's Bay, but certainly all the others. It's a major pest. I suspect very much the human pathway, as Jim mentioned, it's very much like choco and can be confused with choco, which is a edible fruit. And I'm pretty sure it is in Marlborough's plan, so it would be aligning with the top of the south in that regard. So it's coming from the Waikato, it's definitely a pest to be aware of and try and nip it in the bud while you can.
I just looked up the National Plant Pest Accord, and it's a list of species in there, so it shouldn't be available for sale or giving away.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so the next one on our list was Pampas. Yep. So this is specific for Tasman site. So there's 2 locations within Golden Bay that we think that this is possible to control through sustained control.
If I may just to add to that, the pampas, or at least purple pampas, was in our previous regional pest management plan. It was dropped in the last review. It was dropped right across the area. I guess as we've watched pampas march away across the lands of Tasman, we've despaired, and there are still some areas that it hasn't really taken over yet. So the hope here was that maybe those areas could actually be maintained clear of pampas. I think it was a baby in bathwater problem.
We've got a question from Celia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just in relation to the map, pampas map, my first question is, are the purple dots existing sites? They're just, there are purple dots on the edges of the sites which have been outlined up the Aorere and out at Whanganui Inlet. Are those existing sites?
They're the sites from out of the current data is at about March. The staff have been back since I think sometime in April or May, so they will need updating, but it's very, very close to the existing extent.
Right, so is the plan is to exterminate those sites that are on there, as well as preventing spread?
That would be the outcome of the way the rules are written and the way the plan is presented, yes.
Right, okay. So I've just got another question in relation to pampas. And so I think there may be people, I mean, it's very hard to distinguish between the native toi and pampas. And is there a risk that people are still planting pampas, the white version?
My personal observation is that, yes, it is occurring. It occurred more probably about 10 years ago when people were even more confused than they are today, but probably still is occurring. And the problem is one of public education. Once you're, I've talked to farmers about it, once you realise that the native one flowers at one time of the year and the exotic ones flower at another time of the year, they become reasonably easy to tell apart. So there's been a sort of a shift in, and the farmers I've been talking to, a shift in their understanding on which one's the weed and which one's not. So it's something that could come about through public education to get people to be a little bit more aware of it, and then reduce the risk of people knocking back the natives by accident, thinking they're pampas, or spreading pampas by on purpose, thinking it's native.
Right. Because I mean, does the Act actually, I mean, is there ever, I know that there is rules put in place that that nurseries can't stock plants, but are there ever rules that people can't plant them, you know, like divide them up and plant them? Or do we just have to rely on public education for that?
Yeah, happy for me to take it. The Biosecurity Act and the rule that the general provision in the Act that covers banning from sale and propagation is from woe to go. So nurseries can't sell it. People can't take it from each other and grow it. So
right.
Once it's in the plan and once there's in the plan as a pest, that part of the legislation automatically applies. So in the perfect world, people will be aware that it would be illegal to plant it. Obviously, we're in the real world, and if they're not aware, then ignorance is bliss. Okay.
Oh, thanks for that answer. Yeah.
And we've got a question from Councillor Brian Stewart, and then from Councillor Kinmouth Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relation to these two, have we got buy-in from the landowners, or is that yet to come? And I take it you're looking to include but the common pampas and the purple in this area. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea how many landowners are involved in these two areas? Well, I wouldn't, maybe not over there.
Yes, both pampases were to be included. It's another confounding factor trying to separate between white and purple pampas. Certainly purple spreads far more easily than white, but they're both pest species. So the call was made in terms of this proposal to group them together and say, if you've got pampas, you've got pampas, and you shouldn't have. In terms of engagement with the landowners, not a great deal at this stage, Councillor. We are probably a little bit behind in terms of some of the landowner or stakeholder engagement, and we need to ramp that up over the next month or so.
As part of this process, will we do that? Is that the plan?
Yeah, yes, we will. We'll need to undertake targeted consultation as well as probably general consultation via a publicly notified proposal and receiving submissions. So,
thank you, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm also on the same as Councillor Bryant here. Page 26, comments. The good neighbour rule may require further testing. DOC, as we all know, does its own thing its own way and when money it allows. And I hate to see the regional pest management plan be pushed to one side because of DOC not having enough resources or money to help out. Do we have a good relationship with DOC, and are they, obviously that was a sore point, sorry. And do you think they'll come and help us out?
I'll answer this as best I can. This has been a problem through many iterations of the Biosecurity Act and delivery of biosecurity. In Nelson Marlborough, we've had a very good relationship with the Department of Conservation, probably one of the best in the country, I would suggest to you. However, that wasn't the experience across the entire country. And when the Biosecurity Act was reviewed in 1993, the Crown said at the time it would be bound by the new legislation. And the regional councils went, yay, this is going to happen. When we actually read the detail at the end of the day, it does actually say in the Act that the only way in which the Crown can be bound is through a good neighbour rule. So if this becomes a good neighbour rule, the Crown is bound. That doesn't mean they're going to have money, and doesn't mean we're going to have an easy road, but the Crown is technically bound by a good neighbour rule.
Right, I don't think we've got a comment from a question from Mr. Russell.
Oh yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. It's just an observation. When the staff, when Breyer and co went over and did their latest survey, Breyer in particular noted that on that bush pasture boundary with DOC, there was little, if any, pampas at all. It was a very tight bush. So they were quite confident that, DOC would not be a major exacerbator in that regard. And in terms of the good neighbour rule may require testing, that was just in terms of pampas seed can blow 25 kilometres easily. So the questioning there was whether a 200-metre buffer is actually going to achieve anything in relation to how the seed spread. That was all that comment was made for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if no more questions, I think we move on to Sabella.
Okay, so Sabella, this is a current eradication rule. So what we're proposing is to keep the eradication of Sabella specifically, and to introduce a additional rule which is around the level of fouling on boats that come into Tasman and Nelson. this is lining up the rules with Marlborough. So we have a Top of the South Marine Biosecurity Partnership in order to make life easy across the Top of the South, and also to make some clear rules for boaties across the Top of the South to have the same rules as Marlborough, is essentially what we're proposing.
Any questions on this one? No, I think alignment with Top of the South is prudent.
It probably is worth noting that this, so Tasman does not currently have all-out facilities to be able to really enforce this, but Nelson does. So we rely as a partnership between Nelson and Tasman that if we found a boat that needed cleaning in Tasman, which is what happens now if we find Sabella, that we send them to Nelson.
If I just moderate that slightly. Quite often what we will do is we will have the vehicle treated in situ. So divers will go under and they will remove mature Sabella off the vessel. And then when the breeding stock's gone off the bottom, it then gets sent to Nelson to be pulled out of the water and done properly.
Question, Mike?
Is it a big thing to have a haul-out facility, like put it in the LTP?
I'm actually not sure. Rob might be able to actually help with this, but we have requested a facility at Tarakohi, and that's been on the list for a number of years, and I'm not sure actually with the upgrades if that is going ahead or not.
I understand it's not on the present, but we should keep that as a real need for that district. We do have limited facilities.
Yeah. Sorry, Celia. What I might do actually, Rob, is just get you either to come to the table or to grab a microphone. Are you happy just to say that again? I think it's of interest to Celia in particular.
Yeah, we have a limited facility in Motueka at the moment. They are not up to standard. They are not fully contained. And we have that as a live item for Port Turakoe. At the moment, I understand it is not catered for. We tend to have people, if they don't go to Nelson, they use grids, which are poles on the shore, which we actively discourage. So this rule would make this a formal process, so you couldn't get around it. You would have to follow direction. We do, the last thing, sorry, through the chair, is we do have a FAB doc. So if we had an immediate issue, there is a capability within the Top of the South to address that in situ. But as Paul was saying, we typically use a diving specialist team to go and deal with that themselves.
And if I could just add to that, we have been in discussions with the various boating groups in Motueka to try and improve that containment situation so that at least in the clean down areas it goes to a holding tank and then is land disposed rather than back into the sea.
I've just got I think Celia's got a question. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Yeah, just as regards Port Tarakoe, my first question is in relation to the mussel lines, and this is just a lack of my knowledge. Are they at risk of having Sabella attach onto them, and is that one of the reasons why we need to try and eradicate it?
If I may try and answer that, please. Yes, Sabella is largely in our pest management plan to try and protect the marine farming industry in the entire country, but mainly in the Top of the South, obviously, we're most interested in. Sabella do infest mussel lines and infest the mussel surfaces themselves. They can get up to a density of about 1,000 plants or 1,000 Sabella worms per square metre. And those worms can be about 600 or 700 millimetres long. So quite a vast biomass that potentially impacts quite badly on the growth of the mussel product.
Thank you. I think that it's important for this to be taken up with the planning for the improvements at Port Tarakoe as regards the haul out facility. So we can do that, look at that in another forum. But I think that I think it's important to perhaps be in communication with Nick Chin over the importance of this, because I think that this actually what we're deciding today could actually be a little bit of leverage towards pushing along the haul out facility, given that the government is going to be funding Port Tarakoe developments a little bit more than they had been.
Thanks, Claire. A question from Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for you to Paul, just from the time when I was, or previous terms when we've talked about this, it is a little bit more of an issue at Port Tarakoe than everywhere else, from memory. Is that correct?
Tarakoe is the place in Tasman district that we've had a couple of Sabella incursions. It's been brought in by vessels coming from the north of the North Island, around the North Cape, and down the western side of the North Island and into Tarakoe. Been brought in by some large barges that were moving rock to Transmission Gully in Wellington. So yes, we've had a couple of incursions there. So it's particular interest to us, particularly given the development of the mussel farming in Golden Bay.
So I'm just thinking what Councillor Butler was talking about seems like a good idea, but of course it's a juggling act for us funding all these things, but may be appropriate that we can use this information because it seems likely to increase with the increase in mussel boats supposedly coming in the future.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you, Councillor. We've been trying to engage where we can in terms of Tarakoe redevelopment. There are space issues, obviously, in Tarakoe, and it may be that any facility might need vessels moving across the road, for example, into storage for treatment. However, it's not insurmountable, and there really should be some facility there to be able to deal with day-to-day issues as they arise.
Right. So
could I just make one more comment there? And that is that sorry, I've just forgotten it. I'll come back to it when I remember. Sorry about that.
Yeah, a dedicated facility would be much better than what we've got at Motueka. Yeah. Oh, everyone's
Okay. Maybe we can move on from Sabella to what's next? Water salary.
So we can look at water salary and Vietnamese parsley potentially together. They're quite similar. These neither are currently in the pest management plan, and we would like to introduce those as the stain control programs. Yes, questions?
Any questions? No. Nothing from friends on Zoom? No. Okay, no questions from me either.
Okay, so next is wilding conifers. I might pass this one because it's a little bit complex to describe. I'm not sure if either Peter or Paul, which one of you is best to walk through the wilding conifer rules.
I think I'll pass the baton to Peter, but be standing there to sort of take any ones that are thrown back at me.
Yep, no problem, Madam Chair. So wilding conifers, as been mentioned before, is subject of a quite a broad national program of control run by MPI, and your region's got a program going. So the basic premise of doing more to manage wilding conifers is to protect the investment that's been made to date, so you don't lose traction with areas that have already been cleared. Now, most councils around the country have wilding conifers in their pest plans already, and they have a suite of rules that go with that have been more or less generically developed for every council, with a few variations, but generally they're the same sort of rules. So what we're proposing for Nelson Tasman is to introduce wilding conifer rules and a program into the pest plan now, but not in a full-blown state, but kind of bring it in gently with the idea of looking in 5 years' time to do a full review when the full pest plan is up for review. So being a partial review, we felt it worthwhile doing something to bring in some management regime, basically. So that's the premise for it. We've tried to keep it amended or adopt the same kind of line that Marlborough District has gone with wilding conifers. So the same suite of pests are noted that we have, but we've split them up into pest conifers. So these are wilding pine trees that don't have any commercial value, and they're not wanted. Anywhere they occur, they're not wanted. So the likes of Pinus contorta, most people in the room will be aware of that and how dangerous and big spreader it is. Scots pine's probably the other one. And then we've made that separation between pest conifers and wilding conifers. So the difference there is that there are some pine species that do have a commercial value. Obviously, Douglas fir and radiata have huge commercial value, but they're still prone to wilding and creating issues for neighbours. So we've looked at a range of options to do more to manage wilding conifers, and have come up with this mix of looking similar to Marlborough. And we've split it into like a couple of region-wide program with two rules. And one is that there's a clear land rule. So we see this as a basis for land that is clear now, that is highly vulnerable, should be kept that way. And we need a rule to ensure that. So that's the premise for the first one. And the second rule is that there are obviously commercial forests which may cause spread of wildings, and the rule for that is around in obvious situations where it can be proven that there's spread from a plantation forest, that the landowner who's been impacted should not have to pick up the tab for pests or for spread of pines from a neighbouring plantation forest. So both those rules are kind of new thoughts. The MPI wanted those councils to pick up those type of rules, and haven't previously pushed that too hard, but it's getting to that point now. And then the other distinction is for pest and wilding conifers is to protect that investment I mentioned at the start of existing areas that have been cleared, so they don't go backwards. One of those rules, there's three of them. One of those rules is a good neighbour rule, which, as Paul mentioned, is to bind the crown. And we've targeted specific operational areas to try and protect that investment. One is obviously Mount Richmond, and there's another three areas, Takaka Hill, the Halo area around Abel Tasman of Project Janzoon, and Project Divine in Golden Bay have a program as well. So the idea behind those other three rules are to protect that investment made with those areas. So that's kind of a opening gambit, I guess, for Wilding Pines. If Paul, you want to add anything to that I've missed?
No, thanks, Peter. I think you've covered that superbly. It's potentially going to be quite a conversation with commercial forestry interests, because in terms of plantation forest, the proposal is that they should be responsible for wilding spread from their plantation, at least within that 200-metre zone. So we'll see where that conversation lands. I've had some initial conversations with Tasman Pine who are reasonably comfortable with that. One of the things that's happened, of course, in recent years is that the large plantation forests of the top of the south have been sold largely to investment funds based in the US, who are basically retirement funds, and they're looking for ethical investments. So they need to be able to show that they're doing the right thing by the environment in terms of their investments. So I think, you know, the playing field is a little bit easier than it might have been 10 years ago. However, there's also obviously been Crown settlements with iwi claims, and other areas have been transferred into iwi ownership. And we have yet really to gauge how iwi with their commercial hat will respond to these proposals.
So I've just got a couple of questions, if that's okay. I'll start with the easy ones first. Marlborough District Council have adopted a rule like this. I think you mentioned, Peter. When did that happen?
From my memory, they had a limited review in 2020, so 2019, 2020. So it was a rule that came in after the main pest plan became operative. That's is how I understand it.
And then you also mentioned that other councils around the country had also included similar rules. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea what the timing was. Like, have they had them for some time?
Yeah, or what happened? So Environment Canterbury was the first RPMP off the rank, if you guess, if you like. So they established the baseline for the rule development, and then there's over those, that was in 2017, and then over the next 3 years, Otago, Southland, and Marlborough. Well, Marlborough came in a bit later, but certainly the big South Island councils came in after that, and they pretty much adopted the same rules that Canterbury had. So there was a lot of generic guidance provided by MPI at the time. So they more or less picked up those rules carte blanche and plonked them in their plans, except no other council picked up this clear land rule, which we're advocating here. It may not be a big deal to start with, but I think it's important to send the signal that, you know, it makes sense that if land's clear now, why would you want to wait till it's infested till you do anything? And that's where MPI they're doing a review of these rules all around the country, and that's one they've recommended that in hindsight they should have pushed harder for councils to include. But having said that, all the councils that have wilding conifer programs in place have rules to match. So at this stage, Nelson Tasman is out of sync from that point of view, but this is what we're proposing to remedy.
Thanks, Peter. So we're lagging, but hopefully catching up.
I think it's worth observing too that we were lagging in terms of national program funding. So we were one of the last programs to come in at the national funding level. So that occurred after our pest management plan came into force.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Paul. And then you mentioned, Paul, around treaty settlements and transference of forests and that kind of thing to iwi. Will you be doing some kind of specific consultation with iwi around this
absolutely.
strategy? Great.
Absolutely.
Question from Mike.
Yeah, probably for Mr. Russell as well. MPI, I get the impression, and pulled back a wee bit and asking for regional councils to apply some of these rules. I would have thought they could have used some of their leverage to toughen up on some of these rules and give stronger guidance, because having pulled out a few thousand wilding pines myself, the little buggers grow everywhere, and the sooner we keep on them, on top of them, and don't let them grow again, the better. And I think maybe we need to get a bit tougher. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, sure, councillor. Yes, look, I'd agree with that, and I think MPI would agree too. And they engaged a consultant, Tamsin Page, who's a wilding conifer expert, to review every council's approach and the rules. And that review that she's done is finished. I don't know if it's been released yet, what the outcomes were, but she basically interviewed every council, just to see how their program's gone in the last 5 or 10 years. And I know that that clear land rule was certainly one that hadn't been pushed before, and even the plantation forestry rule that we're advocating had not been strongly picked up either. I suspect that may have been pushback from lobbying from the plantation forestry industry at the time. But it is on their radar, and they've done that study to review where things are at. But I don't know what the outcome was.
Thanks, Mike. A question from Councillor Stallard. Aaron?
Thank you. Just looking at Rule B on page 33 of the overall agenda about occupiers of planted conifer forests being responsible for wildings within 200 metres of the boundary of their forest. So there is this element of the person or the landowners responsible for the problem, taking responsibility for solving the problem. Do we have any data on to what degree the 200-metre rule takes care of the problem? That is, to what degree is the rate and spread of wildings within 200 metres compared with further than 200 metres from the forest? For example, in a gross sense, will this take care of 80% of the problem or 20% and so on?
I'll leave that to Peter or Jim, but the 200 metres is a nationally used figure based on some survey data that these two folks have probably got more information than I have.
Just from my point of view, that what Paul said is right, and the general premise, and it's a pretty rough sort of rule, is that majority of seed from plants like this and others, that it falls within that 200 metre radius from the source tree. So it's a pretty rough and ready rule, but it's about it came about through the good neighbour rule discussions with DOC and basically what they'd accept. So some plants like pampas will blow 25 kilometres. Pine seed will blow quite a lot further than 200 metres, but it's generally accepted that 200 metres is where the majority of seed will fall. So that's what they landed on at the time.
You comfortable with that?
My reaction when I was meeting with Horizon since this a wee while ago, that the research that came out of AgResearch at the time was a sort of an AZ20 rule, and 80% of the seed fell out at around about the 200, between the 0 and 200 metre mark. Then taking that as to how that manages spread is a little bit of a guess, though.
Yeah, thank you for that information. It seems to be a bit of a compromise between the science of spread and what's practicable. Yeah, I do wonder if we do look in the future as, in terms of cost, even though 80% might be within 200 metres, the cost of the 20% that go further might be disproportionate compared with that 200 metre buffer. But it's a good start.
So I've got a question from Councillor Bryant Stewart and then one from Councillor Butler Celia.
Thank you. The rule around after the 1st of July 2024, outside of named wild and operational areas must destroy any pest or wild and conifer on their land. Where did that rule come? Is that from our resource regional pest management plan, or is that a national directive?
If I can answer that, Madam Chair, the reasoning behind that was to fit in with the partial review timeframe for this process we're going through now. So if the review gets notified around about Christmas time, and by the time we go through the process, it will be about the end of June before it got finalised. And with appeals to take into account that July the 1st period seemed reasonable to engage this rule from. It's not something you could backdate because it wouldn't really be relevant. It's looking forward to, from this date forward, that rule would kick in. So that's kind of where we landed with July the 1st.
Right. So what I'm just concerned about is farmers that have got scattered and isolated wilding pines or conifers. Currently, how will they be affected? Will they be required to eradicate those after that date?
Well, it very much depends on if they're in vulnerable areas for spread, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Is there probably needs to be more or better mapping of where these highly susceptible areas are in the region. So that's something that hasn't been done yet, but probably needs to. So
right.
What I'm anticipating, this will be a slowly approach to start that off. The focus very much for wild and conifers at the moment is to protect that investment that's already been made, but we didn't want to not address this issue as well, because it is important. But it comes down to more or less what, in the opinion of an authorised person, that's a staff member, but it needs the backing of, well, where are these susceptible areas and how clear are they? So there's a bit of work to do.
Certainly, once you go out to the farming community, you will want to have those areas established, because that's what they'll be asking, particularly around the Mount Richmond Forest Park and the southern areas. I'm thinking of Golden Downs and up towards Top House and Lake Rotorua particularly.
Yeah.
So that's an issue we've got going forward.
Yep. Thanks, Stuart. Celia?
Yeah, thank you. And so part of my question's been answered there. Thanks. But just my other question was just about the actual eradication of the pines. And, I'm aware that some of them are in really inaccessible areas, and the costs of using helicopters are quite high, but there would have to be situations, wouldn't there, where helicopters will have to be used, and so who pays for that? And I appreciate that the rules will help to decide that, but where we've got clear land, would there be areas which would fall into the category of clear land, and which we don't want to have wildings established on, but should pines, a wilding pine appear there, or some appear, as is very evident actually in parts of Golden Bay, then they're pretty inaccessible, and they would have to be dealt with by helicopters, which would have to be paid for. I'm just wondering if that's been brought in. And I know Rob is there, and I'm just wondering if Project Divine are actually planning to use helicopters, or do they just go and climb up and find them and drill and poison them like that? Because that's only going to, only some of them are accessible for that.
So Celia, are you really asking where the cost of eradication lands?
Yes, I am. For where pines are inaccessible for drilling.
Okay. Anybody who can answer that?
I'll probably hand on to Peter in a moment, but in terms of clear land, it would be land which currently is not infested with pines. So therefore, any new pines that occur after this rule came into force are going to be little ones, the sort that could be grubbed out or painted with herbicide or another approach like that. So most of it won't be in those big pine trees and higher infestation areas.
Yep, Paul's covered it spot on. That's how I would interpret that clearland rule. You're dealing with very small scattered infestations that you wouldn't be using a helicopter in those situations.
Thanks, Peter. Any more questions, Celia? Or I think we might move on to koi carp. No. Okay, moving on to koi.
Maybe I can cover that off, Madam Chair. It's just a very simple change. The Latin name has changed from its previous name to something new as determined by the science community, and it's just a matter of making a minor amendment to the pest plan to make sure it's right. If by chance koi were found in the region and you had to serve notices, then you would have to have the correct Latin name written on those notices, otherwise they'd be invalid. So it's a technical minor matter to change.
Lovely, thanks very much, Peter. So I think we're going to something from Paul.
If I could just chime in there, please. There's a section in the Biosecurity Act, 100D, I think it is, that actually allows you to make those changes, provided it doesn't impact on anybody. So changing a name because it will been changed in the scientific nomenclature doesn't introduce a new obligation or cost on anybody. And there are actually other ones that we've come across recently that have changed, and there'll probably be a list of other little changes like that that we would ask you councillors to recommend forward to the respective councils to do a tidy up once we've gone through this process. It's the sort of thing that doesn't have to go out to public consultation. It can be done by a decision of the management agency.
Thanks for that. So if it can be done without going out to consultation, will the koi be included in the consultation, or you're not going to worry about
I don't believe it needs including in the consultation personally, Peter.
Yeah, I guess it just needs formal sign-off by both councils as a minor amendment. I don't know if the joint committee has that. You only have the power to recommend, I think, don't you? But it's not a major. It's just basically a Bay of Plenty have just done it for a very similar thing, and it was just by written agreement from the council. It's a bit more complicated with Tasman and Nelson, but it's just a very simple matter, as Paul said, under Section 100G. But I don't think your joint committee can do that, can they?
Yeah. Anyway, sounds like an efficient process just to have it signed off wherever it best can be without going out to consultation if it's not necessary. So I think that brings us to feral and stray cats.
Okay, so the cats was brought in, and we've tackling this sort of twofold. So this is specific to what is coming through the regional pest management plan. We have also got another process outside of this committee looking at bylaws, but that is not what we're looking at within this plan. So we just want to be careful we don't get sidetracked with bylaw discussion that's not under this committee. So this is specific for feral and stray cats. There's there's 3 proposed sites. Nelson City has a number of smaller sites, high value publicly owned sites, which would rely on control of feral and stray cats. And then Able Tasman National Park, which is already a site-led program within our plan, is to include feral and stray cats the same way that it is included in the Waimea Estuary site-led program. and also the St Arnaud site-led program. So that is, but has a slightly different rule around the pest agent rule, which is a different way of using the Biosecurity Act. We might want to step through the 3 sites separately. So maybe start with Nelson City. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got actually a question. I thought the report was really clear. I was just curious about whether there was any consideration for specifying control of cats as pest agents around areas of really high biodiversity value. So, for example, the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary. Was that considered and decided against?
So I'll talk to this. I suppose when we were forming these rules, we were also considering other things happening and also our capability, our capacity at the time. And that may be a little bit more than we can deliver right now. But depending on what happens with bylaws, things might become easier. Does that answer your question? You can answer further.
So if cats were designated as pest agents, stay specific to the Brook Waimarama Sanctuary, so the Brook catchment, does that put some onus on council to actively control them?
That's probably a question for Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So the intention with the Nelson sites, there's 32 of them, was to name the high value biodiversity sites, but it differs from the St Arnaud program in that there is just the nature and the density of companion cats in Nelson is hugely different to what's happening in St Arnaud, and as has been mentioned, it's probably beyond the scope of what the Nelson City can deal with now, certainly in the absence of any bylaw that allows for chipping to be mandatory and desexing. I think it was a step at this stage to say, hey, we need to do more about cat management. We're not in the business of catching people's companion cats, but we want to be able to deal with cats that might be coming into some of those prime biodiversity sites. So I think it's a question of scale for the difference between the Nelson sites and the one-off St Arnaud, essentially rural site. I'm not sure if that answers the question properly, but that's kind of my insight to it.
That's really helpful. So just to clarify then, cats designated as feral and strays under the regional pest management, if hand in hand we also had a cat bylaw that would kind of support the work.
Yeah, that would certainly be helpful to have a bylaw to support that, but in its absence, that doesn't stop the 2 councils from doing more to manage the feral cat issue. And the St Arnaud cat issue, that rule pretty much came from what they do in Southland in Rakiura, Stewart Island. They have a rule that's a pest agent cat. Basically, they want to stop any companion cat being able to mate with a feral cat and create more cat issues. That's where that came from, and that's what the thinking behind the St Arnaud rule is that. Going back to the Nelson City one, the focus is probably as much as anything to raise the issue, to do more to manage impacts on those sites. Having a rule there about no one feeding or providing shelter to cat, for cat colonies in those areas. It's starting to shine a light on some of those issues, which come into the broader discussion around what to do with companion cats. So it's kind of feeling your way issue, I think, for Nelson, but doing something, doing something solid as well at the same time.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions here? Mike, and then Stuart, and then Aaron.
Given DOC is the largest landowner around this area, what's their opinion on what we're trying to do with feral and stray cats? Are they supportive, on the fence, negative, wanting to put a lot of effort and resources to help us? Just a bit of a heads up would be good.
In terms of outside of the areas that DOC are working, I couldn't answer that question, but DOC do have an active feral cat program within Abel Tasman and St Arnaud. British, I'm not sure about St Arnaud. Abel Tasman actively controlling feral cats. I'm not sure about St Arnaud. Certainly, yeah, the control of feral cats is really important for the likes of ground nesting birds that DOC are actively trying to increase the numbers of.
So I have consulted with the Department of Conservation and included the public conservation land on the Boulder Bank and around Waka Waka Sandflats, and also Port Nelson Limited as well, to keep it contiguous in the area we're looking to control.
Great,
So they're supportive, yeah, they're supportive.
excellent, thanks. Stuart?
Chair, just some questions in relation to St Arnaud. So I take it these are all proposed and new. So firstly, at some stage there'll be a map, I guess, of the St Arnaud area and where the lines are. Good. Right, so there is an existing project, but we don't have correct, that's what I thought, yeah. I just wonder why we want them reported to council within 48 hours. Would it not be better to report them to someone up there that can take immediate action rather than within 48 hours? Cat can go quite a way in 48 hours, a few times.
I think you're quite right there. It really comes down to roles and responsibilities under the Biosecurity Act. But if a person at St Arnaud or the Department of Conservation's field office at St Arnaud was happy for that to happen, then I'm sure that could be arranged.
Right, I think it
We'll
would
have the conversation.
I know that they've got a bit of a thing about feral pets.
Yeah.
So are we proposing that those people that live it and have a domestic will have to have current and new cats going forward microchip? Will there be a date, or how's that going to work in practice? Because obviously there's a number of existing cats, both domestic and feral.
The normal default would be from when the rule came into force. And obviously, cats wouldn't be miraculously microchipped and desexed on that day. So yes, you're right, councillor, that does need a little bit of development.
Yeah, and perhaps tidying up, because it says no person shall keep, hold or harbour any within the matter unless it is desexed and identified with a microchip. So I would have thought that would have had to been phased out over a number of years rather than. And then consultation. They love consultation up there, I tell you. So we're proposing to do that through community council, public meeting, or a combination.
Haven't worked it through, to be honest, but obviously there are community groups up there that are involved in trapping, including trapping of cats.
Friends of Rotary springs to mind.
Yes, and obviously the Department of Conservation, who have taken largely the lead in the pest plant program at St Arnaud. So yes, we need to engage with those parties. It does make me smile though when I think back to some of the subdivision consents for the expansion of St Arnaud that were issued 20 plus years ago, 30 years ago, which did have conditions relating to no domestic animals.
Or having to have bills or something like that. So yeah, so there's a little bit of work to be done rather than that before we put this out to consultation. and just all formulating up a plan. So yeah.
Yeah, as there will be with the forestry sector and a few other sectors in terms of these suggested review provisions.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. Before I head on to Aaron, I've just got a couple of questions around comments you've just made, Paul. The first one is on in terms of cats as pest agents up at St Arnaud. Is it possible that there could be some kind of funding sourced to support companion cat owners up there, and then maybe an amnesty? So rather than the transition happening over many years, like a year, and maybe one or two kind of community events where they can go and get their cat dealt with, like
it's certainly possible. I don't know that Tasman has any great appetite to pour large amounts of money into it, but I think Phil and Richard and Lee and others have had conversations with SPCA about if one has these types of provisions, then there's a better chance of engaging with SPCA to undertake a community sort of clinic for that type of activity. Certainly with the Waimea Inlet site-led program within the current pest management plan, Tasman District Council has been subsidising microchipping of cats in that area, because it's part and parcel of trapping feral cats. You want to make sure that the cat you've trapped is actually a feral cat and not a domestic cat. So it's the sort of gold standard in terms of being able to separate.
Thanks, Paul. So those kinds of things will be explored. Yeah,
oh, absolutely.
And then you just mentioned around consultation with the forestry companies around the guidelines or provisions that we're proposing. If there's pushback, will that come back to this committee? I'm assuming that you wouldn't make any changes to this as a result of pushback from commercial forestry companies without it coming past the group.
That's correct. Once this joint committee has resolved to move forward with changes, if things were needing to be amended, if we ran into a technical knockout, then we would need to come back to you and ask you to reconsider.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Stallard, Aaron?
Thanks, Rachel. I just have a number of questions, which hopefully Craig will ask them one at a time, just to make it easier. Firstly, do we know the proportion of homed cats that are currently chipped and registered in the region?
I did once come up with a number.
They did.
And I can't quite remember what it was. It's part of a national survey that the Companion Cat Council did. And the numbers are basically national numbers, and we just did a sort of derivation or extract from those numbers. I think in terms of chip, it was over 50%.
I think from memory, this question was asked at our presentation to Tasman, and was it 30% that Brent said? It was a bit higher. It was a bit higher than that.
30%
chipped. It was a surprisingly low number of cats coming through the clinic that were actually microchipped.
I think SPCA do have numbers. We don't have them on hand at the moment, but it is known. And in Wellington, where they've had been going on for a few years, that the numbers are up around 90% now of what's chipped, I think, and desect. So at the moment, we're low 50, I think 50%. There are numbers on desexed and whichever unmicrochipped cats. But again, what Paul was saying, they are slightly generalised across the country, so we won't know per street or per neighbourhood.
Okay, thank you. And looking at the definition of feral and stray cats on page, I think it's page 47, just in terms of a cat being taken into custody in one of these high value areas. And the definition's got several aspects, for example, free living, unowned, but essentially for the staff member who's got the cat, it's either it's microchipped, so it's homed, or it's not microchipped, and therefore it's feral or stray. Is that a fair assumption? because the staff member can't look at a cat and say you are owned or unowned.
That's in the raw reading of the rule, that is the assumption.
Okay, thanks. And so related to that, if a person is the owner of a chipped and registered cat, under these proposals, are there any risk of that cat being taken from them in any way from being in one of these named high risk areas?
I'll take through you, Madam Chair. I'll take Peter's thoughts on it as well, but there shouldn't be a risk because we should have the wherewithal to be able to tell that they're chipped cats. Cats, because they get their chip going through the vets, shouldn't be desexed without having the chip. So they come together. And so if you then have a cat that is chipped, wandering around in one of the high value natural areas, it should be sent home. That is the proposal, is that it gets sent home. If you're in St Arnaud and you have the cat that is desexed and chipped, it will get sent home too, even if it panned out that it was the 007 pest agent cat that was running around saving its mates. The thing we think is the key to the pest agency is this ability for particularly unspayed male cats, pet cats, to run around and make more cats. It goes in that direction more than it goes the other way around. And then with the ferals and strays, ferals are almost impossible to adopt once they're adult cats. Strays can be retrained if they were pet cats to start with. If someone's going to that kind of effort and they're not someone that likes having a cat colony with 50 million cats, then you would expect that that cat would be cared enough to end up being chipped and desexed. So I think in the long run, the risks of knocking over a chipped cat would be really, really low.
Speaking for Nelson, and anything operational would only ever use a live capture trap anywhere where there's any chance that a companion animal would be caught in that. And we also, as in the past, work really closely with the SPCA, and the SPCA, the professionals in understanding the sociability of a cat, whether it can be rehomed or whether it's feral and unfortunately has to be euthanized. They'll also have some idea around whether that cat should be taken back, be found and released, or whether it's owned. But I in my position, am 99.9% confident that we won't be damaging or affecting any companion animal. As soon as we upset one owner of a companion animal, we injure then our full programs will fall over. So we have to work really hard to make sure that it's only those ferals. And the strays are on the sociability spectrum, so it depends on with each individual what happens.
Thank you. That's really reassuring.
Yeah, thanks for those answers. And I asked that line of questions because this will be the main concern of members of the public. And it's very helpful if we can simply say to you, be a responsible cat owner, get it chipped and registered, and just go on as usual. Nothing should change for you at all, except it enables us to identify the problem animals and you continue having your companion animal. If I could just ask a few more questions. How does the cat owner have their cat chipped and registered, the cost and procedure?
So we presented this back a couple of months ago now. So the numbers are a little bit grey in my head, but the microchip is around about $30 per animal for the microchip, and then you have to pay to register that microchip, which is about $30 as well. And depending on the status of the cat, it costs a different amount per animal. So a young male is cheap, whereas a female is more expensive. And if the female there's no category. So I think the most expensive cat is about $160. And through snip and chip programs, we get benefits of orders and orders of magnitude. So it comes down to about $100 per animal through snip and chip and SPCA and vets that work with us.
Thank you. You talk about live capture trapping. What does that look like? I know on the Waimea estuary, it's an annual program. How might that look in the named high value areas in Nelson? will it be a program, or will it be in response to information? And is that a trap set and left, or is that a person moving through with the countryside with some ability to trap a cat?
We'll start off very strict on this, and it will become more easier for the community to work in the future. But to begin with, we'll be answering the calls of our conservation, our predator groups or areas where there are feral cats seen. And there are strict rules around putting traps out. They have to be checked. Generally, you put it out the night before, and you check it in the morning. That they can't be left in the traps for any length of time around just humanity issues. And we work hard to make sure that the animals aren't put under due stress. And especially if they're a companion animal, they need to get back to their owner ASAP. Was there more to your question? Sorry, I've forgotten.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Oh, just one other part. So is in response to information at this stage rather than being a schedule of operations?
That's right. It depends on where this lands and coming into act. But we will work with the areas who are calling out for that help first. I mean, that will be depending on where they are, closest to the Brook Sanctuary or in a coastal site where there are breeding birds on the ground, that sort of thing.
Thank you. And last question. I think it says in the report, all of those 31 areas are areas of known pest, feral and stray cats. So the other side of the coin, we've been talking about protecting the rights of those people with companion animals. In those 31 high value areas, I know at least in a number of them, there are active trapping to protect Indigenous flora and fauna. I take it as read that having feral and stray cats is severely damaging to our efforts to repopulate those areas with Indigenous birds. That's the case.
It's the elephant, the furry elephant in the room, because we're dealing with the mustelars, our stoats. They're the common ones, but of course cats with their relationship with human beings we aren't able to touch. And I think I've shown slides before of the number of bats, lizards especially, that are eaten by single feral animals, and getting those numbers down as low as we can will really help biodiversity.
Thanks so much. I don't think we've got any more questions. So I think moving on to recommendations, would that be right, Gwynnie? So if we just go back to, I think it's page 3 of page 7 and 8, we've got the recommendations. So have I got anybody who'd like to move these recommendations more than me? Want to share the love around? Would you like to, Mike? Would anybody like to second? Well, I'm yeah. Sure.
Do you want to include in your resolution that you will view that this committee will view the consultation document before it goes out to public?
I think that's a good idea, but I'll just run that past Celia. So we've just had a question from Gwynnie if we would like to view the consultation document before it goes out to the public. It would be good to get a view from the members.
Certainly
Yeah.
not support the recommendation without seeing that. The quality findings and the cats. So
Yep.
Some work done on those.
Yep. Great. Okay. Mike, you'd like to as well? Yep. Celia, have you got a question or a comment?
I agree, and that was the origin of my first question, was about seeing the public notification. So if we can have something in the recommendation from that or in the resolution. But I was just wondering about number 2, and that whether or not anyone would agree with me that the wording of approves the proposed amendments might be a little bit contradictory, because it sort of looks as if we're agreeing to something that is proposed, when in actual fact it's supposed to mean that maybe that the committee accepts, or another word would be endorse the proposed amendments, because we're not actually, we've got to go through the consultation and the hearing and then the deliberations really before those amendments are actually put into the plan.
Thanks for those, Celia. I'll just ask a couple of questions of the staff. So the first one on having the consultation document come back to the committee, does that slow down the process? Like, do you envisage that we'd have to have another meeting to approve it, or just that it would get emailed around for our feedback? Thoughts would be appreciated.
In response, Madam Chair, we had imagined that the material would come back to the joint committee before notification. Obviously, Councillor Bryant is seeking quite a bit more detail in terms of engagement concerning Walden conifers and feral cats, particularly at St Arnaud. So it's going to be a slightly bigger document than maybe we originally had anticipated. Ideally, we do it via an email system if we could, or some form of virtual meeting. If we need to get back around the table, yes, it's going to come with a time delay. The world won't stop, but it'll come with a time delay.
I think it's pretty important that we do it. So if staff could just work that in so that we're able to have that step, but also not delay this process too much. I know that it's important. Every month that goes by, we're losing more, of our native species. So.
We're running into a little bit of a critical timing issue, unfortunately, in that with Christmas not being that far away, they tell us, there's a period sort of from mid-December to early January that normally you don't have consultation running during. You get caned if you do. It's statutorily disbarred in terms of Resource Management Act as well. This Biosecurity Act is not the same, but let's pretend it is. So if we don't close off consultation before mid-December, I think we may as well forget putting it out until early February.
So just speaking for the Nelson City councillors, we are fairly flexible. So if a meeting needed to be called at short notice, we can work with that. And I guess, yeah, great. So all the committee members really keen to work with the staff to keep this moving forward. Then the second matter was just in terms of recommendation number 2, approves the proposed amendments. Do staff have any concerns that this looks like we are adopting the new strategy, or are you comfortable with the wording as it stands in the recommendations?
It could be improved upon. Endorses is good. For basically recommendation to council, that's what you're really doing. And at the end of the day, it may be a different document that the councils adopt following consultation. So what you're doing is you're endorsing it for the council to notify and engage with the community.
Okay, that's great.
So Robin's got a hand up.
I'll just also let Celia know. Celia, thanks for that suggestion taken on board. Yeah, I was just going to say it should be draft as well. Yeah. Question from Aaron.
Thanks, Richard. I just wanted a bit of clarity about point 4, or recommendation 4. Are elected members, where do we stand on that initially? Are we happy with email to us with a week to respond? And if we have concerns, maybe we convene a meeting, or do you want to go straight to a meeting?
My personal feeling is that we should have some kind of a meeting, whether it be a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting. But I think emailing is likely to get messy, and yeah, it's most effective for the staff as well. I think probably. Yeah. we'll be nimble. Okay. Question?
Just looking at that additional, putting draft in resolution 2 is not required really, because we're talking about proposed amendments to the plan rather than proposed amendments to the draft plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think proposed amendments is fine.
Thanks for that, really helpful. So if I can just check if Councillor Kinnemith, Mike and Councillor Stallard Aaron are happy to with the amendments and still happy to move in second.
I'm happy with the amendments and happy to continue to move it.
Yeah, also myself, thanks.
Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thanks, everybody. So I think there's nothing else, and we are going to have closing karakia, but is there anything else from, no? So
I've got one thing. Ngāti Moti School, as part of their classroom, have put GPS trackers on some of their pet cats and have been tracking them. I've asked for the results of it, so it's not scientific, but it could be a cool idea to spread the word about where they go. So I'll give it to you to circulate to someone once I get the information.
yeah, that sounds great. It'll be really good. Could be a story there, Max. Yes, Paul?
Just two things, just in response to GCS collar tracking. There was a researcher at Victoria. There's a researcher at Victoria University by the name of Haile Kikolas who ran cat track in New Zealand, and that was part of the Wellington bylaw development proposal. Now, if you Google cat tracker, you'll actually find the record of hundreds of cats, and you can click on the picture of the moggy and you can actually see where its GPS tracks have been. And some are couch potatoes and some roam over hundreds of hectares of bush country and quite inconsiderate, and they have multiple families they spend time with. There are some Tasman cats as well in that, because we got some of the GPS collars as well. So there's cats out around Waimea Inlet and Mapua that'll be on that cat tracker website.
Has there ever been consideration of replicating that kind of study down here? It sounds fascinating.
Well, we got those collars down from Heidi, and that's why some of the Tasman cats are on the cat tracker site. Yeah, I've got a rather wonderful little PowerPoint that she put together in terms of some of her research into the movements of cats, which I could share with the committee. It's got some quite amusing bits about when she tried to fit cameras to cats. And she got some interesting footage, except you find cats spend a lot of time in people's bedrooms. So some of the footage wasn't able to be shared.
It would be really interesting to see. I'd be keen. So just one other...
If I may, please, just before the meeting started, Mayor King came in to have a chat about a letter he's just received from a ratepayer concerned about the current Taiwan cherry eradication program, and was a species that initially this group was to look at, and you accepted a recommendation not to on the basis of a review benefit cost assessment that Jim undertook for the two councils. So I just wanted to make sure that the councillors on the joint committee were aware that Mayor King is having to respond to that. And if you've got any questions in your mind about whether or not we should be talking Taiwan cherry, you probably should raise them.
At times.
So just to clarify for the public, Taiwan cherry is not being controlled. Is that correct?
Taiwan cherry is in the current regional pest management plan as an eradication species.
That's been eradicated.
Okay, so it is being controlled
It is
and
very
going for
much so. It's
eradication.
at the
Yeah.
highest level of intervention being eradication. There was some suggestion that maybe that could be dialed back a bit. But the current assessment is that the eradication is still going to produce better benefits than the cost that it's going to incur. And the committee has been going ahead on that basis and left Taiwan cherry alone.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then for members of the public who are concerned about it and having to the cost or the stress of eradication, is there any financial support or not? That's something they take on themselves.
I'm not quite certain where we're at, but certainly initially with the Tasman program, we were paying for the cost of removal of adult trees, and we were providing plants to replace the trees that was removed. Gwynny can let us know whether that's ongoing.
Yeah, sorry. Correct. So we've still got that same rule. So our officers organise the removal of the tree. We pay for that through council funding. So we remove it. We don't stump grind it, but we do remove the tree, and then we pay for a replacement up to the value of $75, so that landowner can go and buy the tree and send us the receipt, and we'll pay them back. So
that's great. So that information will be communicated to the person who approached Mayor King.
Absolutely, and they will obviously have the ability to raise it again in the full review of the pest management plan should they choose to do so.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
I just wanted to add in Nelson, we've had an active control program which is fully funded by council for controlling Taiwan cherry.
Thanks. I think that's it. Just massive thanks to the staff for all of their work on this and for answering all of our questions. And yeah, I feel like it's been a really thorough process. The analysis and the report's really great, and just appreciate all of this work and the upcoming work, which I know it will be a lot ongoing, but yeah, thanks. Okay, so I'm closing karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa punamu te moana, aroha atu, aroha mai, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Let calm go forth, the sea shines like the greenstone, goodwill has been exchanged, acknowledgements to you, me, and everyone here. Thanks, everyone.